is Radio Prague International, coming to you from the Czech capital.
Hello and welcome. I'm Anna-Marie Regner and you're listening to Czechia in 30 minutes, the show where we give you a rundown of what's recently been happening in the country in just half an hour. Coming up on today's program, the Czech national team's World Cup campaign has ended early. Fans are disappointed and demanding answers. Listen for more. Elephant Hansken returns to Czechia after 400 years, this time in metal. Strawberry dumplings feel like a warm hug in a bowl, says Evie Harbury on the magic of Czech cuisine. All that coming up, but first, here's the news brought to you by Daniela Lazarova.
News.
The Czech Foreign Ministry will add President Petr Pavel to the Czech delegation attending the NATO summit in Ankara in July, in line with an interim ruling of the Constitutional Court, the Czech news agency reported, citing ministry sources. Foreign Minister Petr Matsinka said the government would decide on Monday what role Pavel will have within the delegation, which will be led by Prime Minister Andrej Babiš. Government representatives said they respected the Constitutional Court's decision but expressed reservations about the ruling. Babiš described the court's decision as unusually swift and contrary to the interests of the Czech Republic. Meanwhile, in a related development, President Petr Pavel said that as head of state he would lead the Czech delegation to the NATO summit, not just be a member of the team, as implied in the government statement. Mr. Pavel also told reporters that he himself would decide which events he would participate in during the summit. The government failed to include President Pavel in the Czech delegation when it approved its composition on Monday, saying that he had a different stand on the country's defense policy than the government, which has executive powers. In response, the president filed a constitutional competence lawsuit with the highest court in the land, which issued a preliminary injunction ordering the government to ensure Pavel's participation in the summit. Czech President Petr Pavel says his disputes with the government have strengthened rather than weakened his resolve to seek a second term in office when his current mandate ends in 2028. In an interview with Seznam Zprávy, Pavel said the conflict over his participation in the upcoming NATO summit was driven by Foreign Minister Petr Matsinka's retaliation after Pavel refused to appoint the motorist politician Filip Turek as minister. He also suggested Prime Minister Andrej Babiš had chosen confrontation with the presidency to preserve coalition unity. Pavel said he would seriously consider running again if he enjoys strong public support and remains in good health. The Chamber of Deputies has approved in its first reading a government bill tightening conditions for temporary protection granted to Ukrainian refugees. Under the proposal, temporary protection holders applying for humanitarian benefits would be required to be employed, self-employed or registered with a labour office. Recipients would also be required to remain in the Czech Republic for at least 16 days during the month for which the benefit is claimed. The new conditions would not apply to children, students or senior citizens. Prime Minister Andrej Babiš and Regional Development Minister Zuzana Mrazová will represent the Czech Republic at a two-day conference dedicated to Ukraine's post-war reconstruction, which begins in the northern Polish city of Gdańsk on Thursday. According to the Interfax Ukraine news agency, the Gdańsk conference is expected to be the largest event of its kind to date. The scale of the gathering is reflected in the record number of participation requests, with around 9,000 applications submitted. Ukraine Deputy Prime Minister Oleksiy Kuleba said he expects the total value of contracts and agreements signed during the conference to exceed 1.5 billion euros. And finally, a quick look at the weather forecast. Friday should be hot and dry with clear skies and day temperatures between 32 and 36 degrees Celsius. I'm Daniela Lazarova, and that's the end of the news.
The Czech national team's World Cup campaign ended with an early group stage exit, leaving supporters frustrated and demanding answers. Vít Bohanka takes a closer look to see what went wrong.
Alvarado sets it, in it goes now! Alvarado Fidalgo for Mexico!
It wasn't a joyful spectacle for those Czech fans who stayed up late or got up very early to watch the match at the Estadio Azteca in Mexico City. But according to Canal Plus Sport chief football commentator Karel Höring, the loss 3-0 wasn't unexpected.
The defeat was deserved. I'm not sure about the goal difference, because the first half wasn't as bad as it looked in the second half, but definitely deserved to be eliminated from the World Cup, unfortunately, because the performances were not good enough.
Czech coach Miroslav Koubek said after the match that he feels he is obliged to fulfill his contract and doesn't plan to resign or leave his job. How do you see his strategy or performance?
This is, I think, something which we'll talk about a lot in the following days, because one of the reasons why the Czech team has been already eliminated and why so many supporters are angry and disappointed was because of, let's say, too defensive and too conservative style of play. Because we always know that the Czech team, usually the success is based on a good tactical discipline, defensive work, team unity, and set pieces, let's say. But except all the set pieces, nothing worked on the tournament. So this is definitely something what will be talked and analyzed after the tournament, because you can be eliminated in the group stage, but it can be even when you play well, or you maybe even sometimes you have some injuries, or you are just unlucky. But it wasn't this case. It was just the failure was based on poor performances and bad tactics, changes in the lineups. The starting didn't work, so it looks like everything was bad.
So, if I understand correctly, you see that the coach has a share of responsibility for the performance, right?
Definitely, because he's a head coach, but of course, is not the only one person who is responsible and who would take some to critics. There are so many things which are wrong in Czech football. I think there is a lot of questions which have to be answered after the tournament. Not only the things I mentioned about the tactical game and the things on the pitch, but also off the pitch, because we could see that the players, most of the players, they looked tired. There were some information, rumors behind the scenes that they complained on being overtrained. And another question is if the conditions for the team were right, if the Czech FA prepared or provided the right conditions for the team for the full preparation, or if they saved some money and tried to find a cheaper solution, because the conditions in Mexico and the USA are specific, and I think the Czech team were not well prepared also in terms of these specific conditions.
So again, if I understand correctly, you think that it wasn't just the coach, but a whole support team that perhaps should bear some responsibility, right?
If you fail to succeed, there is not only one person to blame, or there are many factors who can affect it. The problem wasn't only on the pitch in terms of poor performances or mistakes. One of the main talking point is why the team lacked energy, lacked their emotions, and these things, the basic things you need to have if you want to succeed. And I think one of the problems can be even in the preparation process, in the preparation part, because we played 2 times in Mexico in higher altitude, but we knew that the team was preparing in different conditions, and all these things could play the part in this failure.
Finally, just to sum it up, what does the performance of the Czech national team at this World Cup say about the state of football in Czechia in 2026?
I think this is definitely not, we can't consider it as a shock. we knew we were very lucky, even in the playoff, because it was very good success, let's say, to go through and qualify for the World Cup after 20 years. But it was based on 2 draws, 4 goals from set pieces, and winning 2 penalty shootouts, which is great. But it also confirmed our limits, or the Czech players in terms of technical skills, but also in the terms of attitude of the manager. We usually play very cautious. We are very cautious football. We are not usually on the front foot. We are waiting and then trying to score from some set pieces or some breaks. So this is not something new, but this is a very complex question, which again has to be answered. I fear there is definitely no easy answer, and there is no easy solution to find it and to repair the situation in the Czech football.
That was sports commentator Karel Herring speaking to Vít Bohanka on the poor performance of the Czech team at the World Cup. 400 years ago, the elephant Hansken was a European attraction that also visited the town of Mladá Boleslav. Today, in the same place, a metal sculpture of her has been created as a part of the 13th edition of the Metal Symposium, which once again brought several international artists to the city.
A female Indian elephant originating from Ceylon named Hansken was one of the greatest European sensations in the 1630s. She was originally purchased by the Dutch merchant Cornelius van Groeneveld and then traveled through much of Europe from Hamburg to Rome. At each stop, she performed special tricks such as fencing with a sword or bowing. One of her stops was also the central Bohemian town of Mladá Boleslav, where she symbolically returned this year. In the first half of June, the town, today best known mainly for the Škoda auto factory, hosted the 13th edition of a metal symposium. The Australian artist Matt Hill also took part and decided to pay tribute to the elephant in his work.
I'm using 1.5mm Corten steel. Because it's Corten steel, once it's finished, we'll spray it with acid, and then over time it will create a natural rusted patina. I think it will roughly be about 250 kilograms.
According to the artist, its final height will be around 2.5 meters, and once completed, it will be put on display in the city centre.
So the elephant's been drawn with computer software, and I use a folding machine, which is very slow and monotonous, and then it's MIG welded together and then face welded with a TIG welder. So very slow process.
The Metal Symposium in Mladá Boleslav was also attended by the Argentine artist Tomás Schinelli.
I was here 2 years ago, and what I did that time was a Czech lion. So for this time, with the invitation, they asked me to do a dragon because it's something that I do a lot in Argentina, and it's not a special kind of dragon. It's just someone that I designed, but it's like a very clear expression of my work.
The dragon sculpture is to be eventually placed in front of the secondary industrial school on whose premises the Metal Symposium took place. According to the organizer of the symposium, Gerard Kajsper, this 13th edition also brought one new feature.
Novinka, máme základní umělecká škola Mšino.
We had a work from the Mšeno Elementary Art School. 6 students aged between 10 and 16 and their instructor jointly created one sculpture. The topic was insects, and this year children chose bees.
A letos se vybrali včely.
Sculptures created during the Metal Symposium will once again be installed in various locations around the city, thereby expanding the unique Mladá Boleslav gallery and public space. Over the past years and across the 13 editions of the symposium, a total of 65 artists from 30 countries around the world have participated. Overall, they created 60 metal works, 20 wooden works, and 7 street art pieces.
Thank you, Romana Grajcerová, for that report. A reminder that you're listening to Czechia in 30 minutes, a half hour of news, current affairs, and interesting stories brought to you by Radio Prague International. Now get ready for Ruth Frankova's story featuring cookbook author Evie Harbury.
Chef, food writer and cookbook author Evie Harbury is the author of My Bohemian Kitchen, which introduces international readers to Czech food through recipes and personal stories. Inspired by her childhood between England and the Czech Republic, the book also draws on family memories and traditions. I caught up with Harbury during a recent visit to Prague to talk about her grandmother's influence on her cooking, the inspiration behind the book, and why she thinks Czech cuisine remains one of Europe's most overlooked culinary traditions. You have just come over from England. What was the first Czech meal you had when you got here?
Oh, that's a good question. I think it was Zizek. It was a fried chicken schnitzel with potato salad, which is one of my favourites and one of the classics.
For listeners who may not know your story, could you tell us a little bit about your connection to both England and the Czech Republic?
Yes, absolutely. So my granny was born in Prague in 1924 and then moved down to South Bohemia. So that's my connection on the Czech side. I kind of grew up between England and the Czech Republic because my mother's side of the family are English. And so I spent my childhood basically living between the two. I went to school in England and most of my life was there. And then we spent the summers and the winters here, basically. Any school holidays we had, we were in the Czech Republic.
Your book is called My Bohemian Kitchen rather than My Czech Kitchen. Why did you choose the word Bohemian? Does it refer primarily to the region or also to a particular outlook on life?
It was actually a bit of both. I feel that I know Bohemia more than I know Moravia. And so it kind of came as a natural first idea of it's my Bohemian kitchen. My granny's kitchen was in South Bohemia and so is mine. So it was almost a play on the word, actually, Bohemian, in the dual sense, the dual meaning of the word, in the idea that maybe people who don't know what Czech food is, they know what a Bohemian is, and even if they don't know the geographical region, they can start to kind of come up with their own idea from what might be in the cookbook from reading the title of My Bohemian Kitchen. So yeah, it was kind of to draw people in, draw a wider audience in to a Czech cookbook, essentially.
You have already mentioned your grandmother, and she really is a very important presence in the book. What are some of your strongest memories of cooking and eating with her?
I always say my granny taught me how to eat. She basically gave me the enjoyment of food and like knowing what food means to people and what it meant to her. And the kind of whole idea of if someone's cooked for you, they're showing you love and they're showing you like the warmth around that. And so my granny wasn't a brilliant cook herself. She loved to eat, but her dishes were kind of quite reduced to like maybe potato pancakes, potato salad. It was a very limited repertoire, but she would take me to the neighbouring house and we would have palatchinky pancakes until we could eat no more. And she would also take me to the pub in Červený Újezd in South Bohemia, and she would sit there drinking beer after beer and stumble me home, even as I was like a 10-year-old kid, and I'd be eating loads of soup, and she would kind of use it as a distraction tactic. She could sit there chatting with her friends and drinking for hours, and if she kind of kept feeding me soup and dumplings, I was happy there. So yeah, basically that pub, which I still go to now actually, even though my granny's no longer around, that's kind of the home and the heart of the Czech food experiences with her.
You have described Bohemian cuisine as something of an underdog among Europe's great food traditions. What do you mean by that?
I kind of mean that it's kind of underrated and not really that known about. And I wanted to kind of go, well, actually you can make room for the underdog. And like there's room for people to hear about more cuisines around the world. And certainly in English-speaking countries, there's a real interest in learning more about the cuisines of the world that you might not know about. And I think that there's so many things in Czech cuisine that are underrated, like the strawberry dumplings, for example, that are just unlike anything else in any other cuisine. And actually such a simple dish and so interesting to people who haven't heard of it before, haven't maybe been to the Czech Republic. And so I think it's kind of that making way for the simple ingredients and kind of ingredient-led dishes of the Czech cuisine, and kind of seeing how interesting they can be just with those nothing fancy, nothing expensive, and kind of really making way for it.
You have already partly answered my question, but still, what made you decide to write a cookbook about Czech food for an international audience? Was there a particular moment when you decided that's what I want to do?
I kind of joke about it being my whole life was leading up to it, but I think it was kind of a long time coming. I trained as a chef, but actually before that, my first ever restaurant job was in a restaurant in the Czech Republic, in my family's hotel in South Bohemia. And so my kind of culinary journey started in the Czech Republic, cooking Czech food. And that was what turned me to wanting to be a chef. And so that was the initial concept. Actually, I know Czech food from learning it in the restaurant. I also have just absorbed it my entire life. I've absorbed the stories that my granny used to tell me and her friends used to tell me. And I'd worked in other people's cookbooks for about 10 years, and then I woke up in the middle of the night with jet lag on a holiday, and I wrote a list of 80 recipes, and at the end of the list I wrote, this is going to be a cookbook. And it kind of evolved from there. I spent a little bit of time working with a literary agent who developed the book with me into my initial idea of 80 recipes to what can this be in a cookbook and how can this develop? So yeah, it was kind of bringing in a little bit of everything from my life experience, my work experience, and putting it all into one 90 recipe cookbook.
And when you were researching the book, was there anything about the history of Czech cuisine that genuinely surprised you?
I was actually surprised about how much of it was historical, and it's largely been shaped over the last 100 years. And I knew what the dishes were, but I didn't really think about the reasoning of them. And actually, the seasonality of it really surprised me. And that's kind of something that's grown historically. If you can eat what you grow and you're guided by the times of year that you're eating, it's such a kind of intrinsic part of Czech cuisine and something that I kind of fell in love with the more I did my research into it.
In one part of the book, you introduce readers to what you call My Bohemian Larder. If you had to choose a few quintessential ingredients that every Czech kitchen should have, what would they be?
Oh, that's a hard one to limit it down. But I would say marjoram would be my number one dried herb in the kitchen. If I'm going for my stocked larder, I think it's such an amazing ingredient, and it's not used in England that much, and you actually can't get it that easily. And so I think that's very underrated, but a brilliant herb. And I think yeast, dried yeast in my cupboard, although you have to keep restocking it if you don't use it enough so it doesn't go out of date, it is such a brilliant staple to have in there. And apart from that, I'd say my favourite fridge ingredient or my favourite fresh one would be chanterelle mushrooms, which I just think you can put them anywhere within savoury cuisine and they're enjoyable.
And is there one dish that you feel best captures the essence of Czech cuisine?
Oh, I think for me it might be strawberry dumplings. I keep going on about them. It feels like kind of the warm hug in a bowl, the warmth of cooking strawberry dumplings for someone, whether it's for your children or for your friends. It's kind of showing love, and also seasonality of the dumplings that, depending on the time of year, whether you're filling them with blueberries or filling them with plums, and what you're serving them with, whether you're making them out of the tvarog dough or a yeasted dough, it kind of feels like that it epitomizes Czech cuisine, and I love it. And I love that it's something so unknown from people who are eating Czech cuisine outside of the Czech Republic, that kind of it shocks them. As the first time I fed it to my cousin, he said, I'm not sure I've ever eaten a warm strawberry before. So it's kind of those small things that make me think actually how magical Czech cuisine is and why I want to share it.
So if you are cooking for someone who has never had Czech food, is this what you would put on the table?
I think so, yeah. And when I've done supper clubs in England, I've always had strawberry dumplings as a part of them. I guess the other thing to introduce people in, I like to go for the things that maybe they've had before, like goulash or Żyzek schnitzel that might be more familiar and like less scary of a dish. But I think that strawberry dumplings always feature and a chlebiczki always feature as well.
One thing that comes across in the book is how difficult some Czech recipes can be to translate. Were there any ingredients or techniques that you simply couldn't find an exact English equivalent for?
There were plenty, yeah. I think that tvarok was actually the first one that I came across, and it was one of the reasons that I started writing the book in the first place. When I was trying to cook Czech recipes in England with an English translate of a Czech recipe, and it translated tvarok to cottage cheese, but then the quantities don't quite work because tvarok is slightly more moist or it's just got a different weight to it. And so actually it made me think, okay, I need to make this with cottage cheese but make it taste like a traditional Czech tvarok. So it was kind of like a balancing of those flavours and those ingredients, and also all of the flours, the hladká mocha and hruba mocha, I just simply couldn't find in England, or if I did, they were expensive, and to me that kind of defeated the point of actually making a quick, cheap dumpling dish with a very expensive flour. So I ended up using semolina and kind of working with the textures and trying to basically make it match, because the whole idea was to try and get more people to cook the recipes rather than scaring them off with an ingredient that they can't get.
You have since published another cookbook called Shrooms, focused on mushrooms, a subject that has also a special place in Czech culture. What attracted you to that project?
I think it was, like you say, very much a natural path from the Czech love of mushrooms and mushrooming. And so when I was approached by a publisher to write this cookbook about shrooms, it felt like a no-brainer, really. But it was basically because I had done so much research into mushrooms for my Bohemian Kitchen, and I'd really spent my whole life with my granny looking through her mushroom books. Before I even spoke Czech, I would read through this book that she had, and I'd learnt the jedovatý and jedli, and that was all part of my very early Czech vocabulary before I knew how to say hello, I think. And so I felt like it was very much part of me. Although it's not a Czech-based cookbook, there is a collider recipe in there. I had to make sure that I put something Czech in there. And even my Bohemian Kitchen has mushrooms on the cover. It kind of felt like actually the two go hand in hand.
Finally, after my Bohemian Kitchen and Shrooms, do you feel there are still more Czech food stories waiting to be discovered?
Definitely. I would love to keep diving into the world of Czech cuisine. I think that maybe something that I wasn't able to cover enough with my Bohemian Kitchen was the bakery, the wonderful world of Czech bakes, because I was so limited to the amount of bakes I could fit in, and the Czech bakes are never ending. I think I limited myself to maybe 5 or 6 Christmas biscuits, where there must be thousands. So I think something I'd love to develop more is more baking recipes. And the baking from Czech Republic is known the whole of Europe wide. And I kind of want to take that into America and take it into New Zealand, Australia, England, and introduce that.
Evie Harbury, thank you very much for coming.
Thank you. It's been nice to be here.
That interview from Ruth Franková brings us to the end of today's half-hour broadcast from Radio Prague International. For more, you can visit our website at www.radio.cz. I'm Anna-Marie Regner saying thank you for listening and goodbye.